Mr. Black, this is Beyond Creepy. I've been kind of wanting to make a video where I talk about like Bigfoot and UFOs in the same place at the same time. I found a couple of stories that I thought were really interesting, and I'm going to cover them in this video. I hope you enjoy.
In July 1984, a group of 20 people, including Marion Lane and her brother Chris, had planned to head into the Shasta National Forest and hike up to Dead Falls Lake. Their intention was to camp overnight and then leave the next day. They planned to bring booze, a guitar, and hot dogs. When the day finally came, it was beautiful, perfect weather. They made their way through the woods and arrived at Dead Falls Lake, a popular hiking and fishing spot in California, which leads to the summit of Mount Eddy. At around dusk, they lit a campfire and began their evening of guitar-inspired sing-alongs, munching hot dogs and drinking around the campfire. They were having a great time just living in the moment. Sadly, their evening of fun would be short-lived. At around 2 a.m., when the party was still in full swing, a blue light suddenly appeared in the sky, emanating from thousands of feet up, glowing over one of the northern peaks. Considering that there wasn't anything out there at that hour aside from people like them, it was a pretty bizarre sight. Nevertheless, everyone at their little party began staring up at it. Some just sat and others stood as they watched the blue light grow in intensity. To Marion, it seemed as though the source of the light was about to come over the peak, and after about 10 minutes, it did just that. It was miles away, but they could now make out a large glowing disk, exuding what appeared to be a combination of bright blue and white light. From a distance, it almost seemed like the disk was, quote, alive. If anyone at the campfire had been watching, they certainly were now. As it began its descent, beams of light started to emanate from different sides of the object, moving from one side to the other, flashing on and off, as it appeared to be scouring the terrain for something. Marion recalled that some of the people in the group, including many of the girls, were becoming nervous and afraid. But what could they do? There was nowhere to run and hide, especially since the searchlights on the object were so bright. It lit up everything around it. It slowly moved closer and closer to their camp, creeping up on them, filling them with tremendous fear. Finally, they realized that whatever it was could undoubtedly see their blazing fire, so some of them started to throw dirt on the flames and squirt them with beer. Others filled empty bottles with water from the lake to extinguish it. It wasn't easy to gauge the distance and size of the object, but it was slowly coming towards the lake, and the entire forest landscape was illuminated beneath it. Now it was glowing with a yellowish-white color, but bright blue still swirled around its base, which appeared like pigment mixed into a can of fresh paint. After about 10 minutes, the friends debated. Half of them wanted to hike out, while the other half thought it would be unwise, given how dark it was and how much alcohol some of them had consumed. It didn't deter them. Around 10 of them grabbed their stuff and began walking out. Marion, Chris, and the others who stayed could only watch as the object very slowly inched towards them. The crowd had now reached the other end of the lake, which was still a considerable distance away from them, but far too close for their liking. Marion could now make out that this disk was at least 200 feet across. She had never seen anything like it. Suddenly it stopped and began to pulse, growing brighter and then dimmer, like a heartbeat. All of the searchlights had stopped moving, and a ring of faint, multicolored lights started to circle around its outer edge. They were red, green, and yellow, and they weren't sharp beams like the searchlights. The campfire was completely out by now, and the remaining group stood there in pitch darkness, totally awed by what they were seeing, as the object hovered over one particular spot for almost 20 minutes. Then, suddenly, a vast column of powder blue light flashed from its base to the ground below, as the craft continued to pulse. From their vantage point, it was little more than a speck. The disk pulled something up from the ground within the tube of light. Marion and the others were in complete shock at this point. The object they had been watching had suddenly pulled something up, utilizing a light beam pointed at the ground. The thing stopped about midway between the ground and the craft, literally suspended in midair within the light. It remained like that for another 10 to 15 minutes, nothing moving, not the craft nor the thing in its light. Everything was still and the group could only stand and watch. Suddenly, several other specks started to descend from the craft's base. These specks were much smaller than the first, but again, from the distance they were, there was no way of telling what any of these specks were. The descending specks stopped in the middle of the tube, right where the first thing was, after which another half an hour of stillness followed. The specks that had descended from the craft were drawn upward and vanished from their sight. However, the other one remained suspended in the middle of the tube of light. Then the craft stopped pulsing and began to glow brightly again, illuminating the entire lake area and the countryside below. Then it started to move. It glided slowly and silently over the lake, heading directly for Marion and her friends. Not a word was spoken among those who remained. They were shocked and silent, staring in utter amazement. It was only a football field away and coming closer, and Marion could see this was a glowing structure. Speaking to author and researcher W.J. Sheehan, Marion noted that the disk was large, possibly 400 feet wide, not the 200 feet she initially thought. It was just enormous and absolutely terrifying to see. The shaft of blue light remained intact, unmoving as the ship itself moved over the lake. The water started to grow choppy, just like it would on a windy day. However, it was only choppy within the confines of where the light contacted the surface of the lake. Everything around the perimeter was still calm. However, the light was drawing on and/or disturbing the water as it passed over it. The speck that had lifted from the ground and into the tube of light was a gigantic, hairy creature. It was not a bear. To everyone present, it looked like a, quote, Bigfoot, as they had come to know them from popular culture and movies. According to Marion, the creature, the Bigfoot, looked like it was in a state of suspended animation, held in the light some 75 feet off the lake's surface. It didn't move an inch and was utterly aglow in the soft blue light. The dish-shaped object then passed just to the east, and Marion and her friends all turned like automatons, watching it move away. Then, suddenly, there was a bright flash of light, and it was all over. The disk was totally and completely gone. It had not flown away at a high rate of speed. It had just vanished. After the object departed, Marion and her friends remained standing in the darkness in a total daze. It was almost as if some magical force had taken us over, Marion recalled thinking after the experience. To her and the others, seeing the Bigfoot-like creature motionless within the tube of light was unbelievable, though they still have no idea what the connection between the creature and the craft was, and opted not to speculate on it. Marion eventually contacted Sheehan, who published it in his book, UFO, Sightings and Encounters Volume 1. Sheehan also discussed the case on his self-titled YouTube channel, which I highly recommend. Upon hearing this case, I was reminded of another, shared by Leslie Garcia on her Cryptids Canada podcast. It had been sent to her by a woman named Sue Von Klepp. It happened in 1999. According to Sue, she and her brother Steve and some friends, Edmund and Brent, had been invited to spend a week at a posh cabin in Missoula, Montana. Their friend Jason had been getting serious about a girl named Tracy, and it was she who invited them all to stay at her cabin, which overlooked the valleys. On the first night after dinner, at around 8:30 p.m., while sitting outside chatting, drinking coffee, and watching the sun go down, they all noticed a strange object in the sky. It was above the meadow at almost the level of the hills off in the distance. It appeared to be triangular and spear-shaped, kind of like an arrowhead. It had a flashing red light at each point, and they flashed at the same time. Slowly the craft started turning until it was pointing right in their direction. They remained watching nervously. They convinced themselves that it was too far away and it most likely could not see them. Jason got up and turned the outside lights off to the cabin. The object seemingly reacted by turning off its lights. When Jason turned the cabin light back on, the craft did as well. They did this a few more times, with the craft always copying their actions. Then things got scary. Without warning, the object shot forward, coming to a dead stop directly over them. Sue noted that it stopped so quickly it seemed that the momentum made the front end point downwards right at them. Terrified, they all rushed into the cabin and ran around shutting off the lights, locking the doors and closing the windows and curtains. They had left the coffee plate outside, and after some coaxing, Sue and another girl went out to get it. That is when they noticed the object was gone. As well, the plate and the coffee was gone too. The full cream, sugar, and coffee tins were now completely empty. They went back inside. They played Monopoly to take their minds off of it. One of the friends, Brent, went to the kitchen sink and glanced out an opening in the curtain. He screeched, "Oh my God," and jumped back. He told them that he had seen some kind of creature looking in the window. Years later, he admitted that he thought it was a Sasquatch, but was hesitant to mention it at the time. The friends looked out the window but saw nothing. Later that evening, Sue had joined her friends upstairs when they heard what sounded like footsteps on the roof. Clear as day, I could hear footsteps. Not heavy by any means, but clear bipedal steps running back and forth, like there was almost 6 to 8 kids running around on the roof. Everyone agreed to sleep downstairs. The next morning, everything seemed fine, and they brushed off the previous night's weirdness. Steve and Edmund headed off to fish at the river. Tracy and Jason went upstairs to nap. Downstairs, while sitting on the porch with Sue, Brent noticed something in the tree line, watching them and moving around. Sue could not see it when she looked. Brent retrieved a mirror and then had Sue turn around. He then told her to hold the mirror out and look. That is when she saw it. It had a big bulbous head, small nostril holes, and big black almond-shaped eyes, peering at her from behind a tree. To her, it looked like a gray alien, so common in movies and literature. As if aware it was being seen, the creature moved back behind the tree. Around that time, Edmund and Steve came rushing back, insisting that everyone get back in the house, that they had seen a Bigfoot. They revealed that while going to the river to fish, they were followed by something in the woods that matched their footsteps. Once at the river, they caught a large number of fish. When they thought they might be at their limit, they noticed that their basket of fish was now suddenly empty. They assumed a grizzly had somehow grabbed their fish while their backs were turned. They began to walk back to the cabin. About 40 feet into the woods, they spotted it, a big, hairy, bipedal creature walking step by step with them. Eventually, the creature realized that it had been spotted, and at that point, it began walking in their direction. Edmund and Steve immediately tore off, eventually making it to a clearing. They described the creature as dark brown in color and maybe 7 feet tall. The hair appeared bushy in spots. In the years since, Sue and the others came to believe that the triangular object might have dropped off the gray-type being, but they weren't sure about the Bigfoot and assumed it was possibly a coincidence that it was there, though they weren't certain of that. They returned to the cabin in 2003 when Tracy and Jason got married. They had no further incidents.